The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Surovell.
Speaking to the bill, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's some serious issues with this bill I think that the body ought to be concerned with. It actually represents a very major, significant change in Virginia law that involves decades of privacy issues, family decisions, and the way our system treats these kinds of problems. The thing that should be most concerning to the body is the way it changes the juvenile intake process. Right now, whenever anyone has a problem with a juvenile that they want to get the legal system involved with, they have to go to the juvenile court. They deal with a court employee who's an intake officer. These intake officers hear criminal matters, they hear protective orders, they hear child abuse and neglect matters, they hear CHINS petitions, which are children in need of services, custody and visitation matters, which involve parents going and initiating custody and visitation actions. And this legislation asks for a court employee, not a lawyer, not a psychiatrist, not anybody with medical training, not anybody with psychiatric training, to then report information to a school based on their judgment. Now, that should be concerning for a lot of reasons. First of all, note that this legislation would not have changed what happened in Newtown, what happened at Virginia Tech, what happened in Arizona, what happened in Aurora. Adam Lanza was homeschooled. He did not have any interactions with authorities before he did what he did as a juvenile. James Holmes, the shooter in Aurora, he had no interactions that I'm aware of with juvenile law enforcement before he turned 18. Jared Loeffner did not develop any problems until he was 18, according to what I've read. Sung Hui Cho at Virginia Tech, while he had issues as a child, he did not come into any kind of contact with the juvenile legal system in any way at all his entire life. He developed problems once he was in college, and it was the college's failure to deal with those issues that had been criticized, not the juvenile intake system. What the body needs to be concerned about is when these juvenile intake officers go and report these things, it initiates a whole chain of events which can have serious consequences for a child. And this entire chain of events is purely based on a one-sided, unproven, unadjudicated accusation from a person. Could be anybody. Could be a police officer, could be a parent, could be a neighbor, could be another child in school. It could be any manner of person with an axe to grind to initiate this chain of consequences. None of this stuff has ever been adjudicated. It's all one-sided, unilateral accusation. This creates all kinds of opportunities for mischief. For example, for those of us that practice in the area of domestic relations, one thing we frequently have disputes about is what school a child should go to. Parents separate. One parent wants the child at their school, another one wants the child at another school. And parents will say a lot of things to get what they want when it comes to their child. And if one parent goes and does their juvenile intake for their custody or visitation matter, or if they go seek a protective order against the other spouse, if they say something that might lead a juvenile intake officer to believe that their child wants to assault a teacher or a student, they just say it. Then this juvenile intake officer is then required to go call the principal up and say that this kid has expressed this, tell the principal this. The principal then has to notify the threat assessment team. Threat assessment team then has to go and initiate some kind of intervention proceeding, all based on something that a parent said that maybe had an axe to grind against the other parent. I've seen situations where neighbors have problems with other neighbors' kids. I've seen situations where other parents have other problems with other people's kids. And this creates all kinds of opportunities to meddle with a child's life vis-a-vis the legal and school system. And these intake officers are required to report it if they hear anything that leads them to believe there's an issue. I would also note that This also disincentivizes families from going to the legal system. Because frequently, if parents have problems with their children and they feel like they're having issues controlling it, they'll go to the legal system to try and get the court's help in getting their child under control. Now, under this system, if the parent says something to the juvenile intake officer, the parent knows that the school is going to get involved in this. And that's a whole other world you don't want to be in. And this disincentivizes a parent from going and asking for help. At its essence, what it really does is it involves the government in a whole new way in family matters, where it has not been involved in before. It gets the school system involved in the rearing of children. It gets the government a lot more intimately involved in the rearing of children. It breaks down barriers that have existed for decades. And I'm not clear why, because nobody's identified to me a single situation that this legislation would change, a single outcome in this state this legislation would change. And the last thing I'll note, Mr. Speaker, is the vote count on this bill. I would ask the body to tell me the last time this body has seen myself and Delegate Corey vote no with Delegates Gilbert, Klein, and Morris. And I think you ought to think about that. You ought to think about that, because that don't happen very often. And I think the body should consider that. There are serious issues with this bill that a lot of people should be concerned about. And normally when something that is this important comes before this body that changes so many important things, it goes through a lot more vetting. It's looked at a lot longer period of time. It's not rushed through the system. It doesn't have 8 amendments put on it in a committee hearing when it's introduced 4 weeks into session. This needs to slow down. This train needs to slow down, and we need to look at this carefully to make sure we're dealing with all the unintended consequences. I would ask the body to vote no.